Europe, it's not just a continent, it's our home. For decades and centuries, we have been divided, despite being one civilization, despite sharing a common history. From Greece and Rome to present days, many of the brightest European minds have dreamed of a united Europe, and some, like Napoleon, even attempted to achieve it. Unfortunately, our continent remains divided. The European Union is at risk of being undermined by far-right and far-left extremists from within, as well as by Russia and the United States from without. We, the people of Europe, cannot afford the risk of destroying our home again, because for the first time we have a real opportunity to unite the entire continent. The European Union is not perfect, yes, in current state especially, but it's the only institution that represents our shared will for united Europe. But what is Europe? What defines us as Europeans? Why do we even talk about that idea of a united Europe? These questions are the focus of today's discussion. So let's find out. Well, let's begin with the easiest part. Let's make a look at the map and ask, what do we see? Where are the edges of Europe? Of course, in geographical terms, we could say that the edges of Europe lie along the Ural Mountains and the Ural River, the Caspian Sea, the Caucasus Mountains, the Black Sea and the Bosphorus. But wait, if Europe just a geographical term, why is Cyprus, which is geographically in Asia, part of European Union? Why is Georgia, which lies on the other side of Caucasus Mountains, a pro-European nation, despite having an anti-European Union government? And at the same time, we do have the situation where Turkey has been an European Union candidate for decades, even though Istanbul is partly in Europe. Don't you see the paradox? Geography, it's not a way to define what Europe is. It explains nothing. If we try to define Europe through geography, we will never understand why so many wars have happened on our continent. Why did so many people dream of ruling the whole continent? Why did so many people wish to see a united Europe? Because Europe is not just a piece of land. Land is what we are used to seeing under our feet. Europe is an idea that lives in our minds. And if you don't understand this from the very beginning, everything else we talk about will not make sense. I mean at all. Europe begins where a human being chooses freedom and identity, not where a demarcation line is drawn. But where does the idea of united Europe actually come from? Is it something modern, something created after the Second World War, or is it much older than that? To answer this question, we need to understand one simple thing. The idea of unity in Europe did not appear suddenly. It was not invented by politicians in Brussels. It is the result of centuries of thought, conflicts and experience. If we go back to antiquity, we can already see the first hints of unity, not as political project, but as a shared world. The Roman Empire, for example, did not just conquer territory. It created a common legal system, a shared economy, and a network of cities connected by infrastructure. For the first time, large parts of Europe were not just geographically connected, they were integrated. But this unity came at a cost. It was imposed from above. It depended on power and control, on the strength of the state, and when that power disappeared, the unity disappeared with it. After the fall of Rome, Europe fragmented again. Kingdoms, tribes, and later nations emerged. But, interestingly, the idea of shared Europe did not vanish completely. During the Middle Ages, unity was imagined in a different way. Through religion, Christianity created a kind of cultural and spiritual space that connected different regions. People did not necessarily think of themselves as Europeans, but they were part of the same civilization. Later, during the Enlightenment, the idea of unity became more conscious. Thinkers began to ask, what if Europe could overcome war not through empire, but through reason? The philosopher Immanuel Kant was one of the first to propose a real model. In his essay, he argued that lasting peace could not only exist if states formed a kind of federation, a system based on law, not force. This was a turning point, because now unity was no longer about domination, it was about cooperation. In the 19th century, this idea became even more explicit. The writer Victor Hugo openly spoke about the United States of Europe. He imagined a future where a nation would remain different but no longer fight each other. At the same time, there were also attempts to unite Europe through power. Figures like Napoleon Bonaparte tried to bring the continent under a single system, and this is where we see two competing visions of unity, one based on force and then another based on consent. History shows us very clearly which one failed. Every attempt to unite Europe through conquest ended in collapse, because people resist domination, because identity cannot be erased by force. But the idea of voluntary unity that continued to evolve. And then came the 20th century. After the Second World War, and especially after the Second World War, the idea of a united Europe stopped being theoretical. It became urgent. For the first time, European leaders and societies understood something fundamental. If Europe remains divided, it will destroy itself. This realization transformed the idea of unity from a dream into a political project. Not an empire, not an utopia, but a practical solution to a historical problem. And this is where the modern form of European unity begins, eventually leading to the creation of the European Union. But even here, we need to be careful. The European Union did not create the idea of a united Europe. It is only the latest expression of it. The idea itself is much older. It comes from Rome, from Christianity, from Enlightenment philosophy, from centuries of war, and from the realization that division has a price. So, when we ask, where does the idea of a united Europe come from? The answer is not simple. It comes from history, from failure, from suffering, and from the constant attempts of Europeans to find a way to live together without destroying each other. And maybe that is the most important thing to understand. The idea of a united Europe was not created in a moment of strength. It was born after weakness, out of the understanding that the old ways no longer work, and that if Europe wants to survive, it has to change. So, what makes us Europeans? Not what country we live in, not what language we speak, not even what passport we carry. Because none of these things actually explain anything. But a Frenchman and a Pole share something in common, even if they can share almost nothing in everyday life. But why? As you remember, I mentioned ancient times and Middle Ages in the previous part of the video. So now I have to expand on that. Well, to understand this, we must go backward to the very beginning of our history, to a time when Europe did not exist as a political idea, when there were no nations, no borders in a modern sense, only scattered civilizations trying to understand the world around them. Because what makes us Europeans does not begin with states, it begins with a way of thinking. In most ancient societies, truth was something given. It came from tradition, from religion, from authority. You were born into it and you accepted it. But in one small part of the world, in ancient Greece, different happened. People began to question not just small things, but everything. What is the truth? What is justice? What is a good life? Figures like antique philosopher walked through cities asking questions that had no easy answers, and more importantly, taught others to question as well. This was not just philosophy. This was a revolution, because from that moment on, you simply inherited. But a civilization cannot survive on questions alone. It needs structure, it needs order, and this is where Rome changes everything. The Roman Empire does not just conquer land, it organizes it, it creates law. And not just laws that serve a ruler, but system that can exist beyond any single person. System that outlive emperors themselves. For the first time, people begin to live not only under power, but under rules. And this creates something fundamental, the idea that even authority can be limited. And this is where something even more important begins to take shape, because what Greece and Rome created were not just two separate traditions, they were two different ways of interacting with the world. Greece turned inward, it was introspective, philosophical, focused on understanding truth, meaning, and the nature of existence. Rome turned outward, it was practical, organizational, focused on power, expression, and control of reality. And this combination is not accidental, it is the foundation of European civilization, a civilization that thinks and acts, that questions and builds, and then everything collapses. The Roman Empire falls, political unity disappears, Europe fragmentates into kingdoms, tribes, and local powers. What follows is often called the Dark Ages, a time of chaos, instability, and constant conflict, where law weakens, knowledge declines, and order breaks apart. But here is a crucial point. The foundation does not disappear, it survives, not in empires, not in states, but in institutions. One of the most important of these institutions is the Church, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church does something unique in European history. It does not simply replace political power, it exists alongside it. Kings rule land, but the Church claims authority over something higher. Morality, truth, and legitimacy, a permanent conflict between spiritual authority and political power. At first glance, this might look like weakness, division, instability, but in reality, it creates something entirely new, a system where no single authority is absolute, where power is divided, where rulers can be challenged, not only by armies, but by ideas. Historians often point out that this tension between church and state became one of the early forms of what we now call checks and balances, not in a modern institutional sense of course, but in principle, because for the first time power in Europe was not completely unified, and even in this fragmented, chaotic Europe something else remained, a sense of belonging to the same world. Different kingdoms, different rulers, different conflicts, but a shared civilization. And this becomes especially visible when Europe faces something external. When the Mongols advance into Eastern Europe during the Mongol invasion of Europe, or when Islamic powers expand during events like the Crusaders, Europeans do not see these conflicts as purely local. Even when Europe is politically divided, it is not mentally divided in the same way. There is still a shared framework, a shared understanding of who we are, even if that we is never fully united. What makes us Europeans is a continuous development of ideas from Greece to modernity, ideas that survive even when states collapse, ideas that persist even in chaos, because what unites us, it's how we do understand the world.